About 3 minutes after the hour. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Catherine Murphy, as I've said. Thanks for joining us this evening. We are really excited to have all of our parents joining tonight that took the time during this busy season to come and begin a conversation as a school about race. We are all, as parents, all members of the APT, and tonight we are thrilled to offer a chance to go deeper in a conversation about race, understanding about racial justice, about how we think about it, and how we talk with our children about it. As you all probably know, our school is doing a lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're doing a lot of work with students and with faculty and staff. I'm sure that you've read about specific initiatives such as the Steps to Racial Justice that were published this summer. And I think this really is a chance for us to begin to develop skills to talk with our children thoughtfully about race with respect and empathy. Equity and justice are themes that emanate from St. Stephen's and St. Agnes school mission and from our Episcopal identity. And we are excited to discuss this topic tonight. Please ask questions in the chat. This is set up as a webinar, so we will be monitoring the chat, and then at the end of Dorri Scott's remarks, we will be sharing questions and having a conversation about them. I would like to welcome my friend Camille Wright, who is serving with me on the APT board this year in the role of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Liaison to St. Stephen's and St. Agnes. And Camille is going to introduce Ms. Dorri Scott. Welcome, Camille.
Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. So those of you who don't know me, as Catherine indicated, yes, I'm the liaison this year. I do have a son who's been there since at St. Stephen's St. Agnes since kindergarten. Now he's in 10th grade. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our facilitator for the night. Her name is Miss Dorri Scott. She completed her undergraduate degree in political science at the College of New Jersey. She earned her master's in clinical social work from the University of Kansas, and is a graduate of the Harvard Business School Executive Education in Boston, Massachusetts. Dorri is very passionate about mental health, wellness, and demystifying myths surrounding mental health illness. She practices clinical social work, family parent, leadership coach, and certified family negotiator. She's the Director of Education Services at the WISE Counseling and Assessments. She works with individuals, families, and groups like ourselves. She is certified family mediator, completing her credentials towards parent coach certification, is working towards her doctorate in women's studies with an emphasis in leadership. An international speaker, as she is. She's recently named as an affiliate faculty member at the Boston University Center of Anti-Racist Research, led by the renowned Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Her collaborative advocacy work includes research, policy, review for change, media collaboration, international lecturing, publishing, and education through seemingly intractable problems in inequity and injustice. Ms. Dorri Scott is a lover of people in the community. She is a social justice advocate. She serves to make the world better and sees good in all God's children. She loves poetry, the spoken word, the arts, world traveled, and she has visited over 38 countries in 44 states. We are very thrilled to have her here with us this evening. If everybody could just please welcome Ms. Dorri Scott. Thank you.
Dorri, welcome. We are delighted to have you. I wanted to offer Mrs. Adams a chance to say hello and offer a welcome before we get into your remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, for being here this evening. Camille and Catherine, we are so grateful for your partnership. We all know that raising children requires a partnership between the school and families, and I have seen that over and over at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes. And I think the school is working hard with your children as well as with faculty and staff to talk about important issues around racial justice. And we've heard over and over again from students how important it is for for these conversations also to start at home. And so we're so thrilled to have this opportunity tonight to learn from Ms. Scott about these important topics and how we talk to our children about race. And I really believe it is going to make our community a better place. It is going to make our world a better place. And we are so thrilled, Ms. Scott, to have you here this evening. I also want to express my deep gratitude to Kiki Davis and to Bob Wyman, who have been leading so much of the good work on this. Unfortunately, Kiki could not be with us this evening due to a family emergency, but please know how excited she is about this evening and her organization to make this happen. So it is now my pleasure to turn it over to Ms. Dorri Scott. We are so grateful that you are here, and I'm so excited to see so many parents and participating this evening. Thank you.
Again, I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank everyone. Particularly, I want to thank your headmaster, your administrators, your faculty, the staff, the parent association. It is an honor to be part of a school that's moving forward with a difficult conversation. So what we're going to do this evening is we are going to talk race. Again, thank you so much. And I want to make this a fun evening. I'm going to do this in a couple of parts for you. So let me just tell you how I'm breaking this up. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. And I think that's important because I want you to know how I got here, how I started this story, how I started with this social advocacy. This is not something that just came overnight. It's actually something that I've grown into, and to have been honored. I've been so honored to hear that Dr. Kendi wants me to be part of his research. This goes back to when I was 8 years old. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. I want to talk to you about white privilege. We've heard the story, we've heard the terms, and I want to say, when I teach the small classes, I say something like, please be in a safe place with me. Please understand there is no judgment. Everybody's at a different place with their story. It is my job to help you get comfortable with the uncomfortable, because that's how we're going to grow. Finally, I want to talk to you about how you can be an anti-racist. And you know, Dr. Kendi has defined that, so we'll talk about it briefly. I've also invited my son to join me. I'm not sure he's going to do it, but the reason I invited him for several reasons. I sat where you are several years ago. I was a parent who sat at one of the independent school, many of the group times that we had together. It was a pleasure to be part of an independent school program. Now, don't hate, he graduated from Georgetown Prep, but the good news is he's now working at your school. So you'll get to meet him, and I'm so excited. I say that to say I wanted him to share a little bit about what it was like for him, an African-American male, to talk about what it was to be, he started at Georgetown Day, went on from there to Landon, and then at Georgetown Prep. But most of the time he was a lonely only. And many of your students don't understand what your students of color are going through even today. So let's take a look back on my story and we'll go from there. If you pull up that picture, I'd like to start with my story. And that's a story of me, and I'm sure you can find me. I'm sitting in the middle just in case you can't see. And that's me sitting there. My parents moved when I was 8 years old to a predominantly Jewish community. I got involved with social advocacy because my parents were denied an opportunity to buy the home that they bought that I ended up growing up in. The home was in a Jewish neighborhood that said no one Black could move in. The Jewish families around the neighborhood helped my parents, as well as the NAACP. I remember as a young girl, many people coming to our home, people signing papers, having all these long meetings. That was my first indication of what it was like to be in a different community. When we moved into the community, this is what it looked like for me. I was the lonely only. It was hard. I didn't know much about the Jewish community. I didn't know much about what racism was, and I certainly didn't know anything about how to move forward in a world that wasn't always kind to me. I remember saying to my parents, I'm a smart girl, why can't I be the princess in the play? And they said, I can't explain it except it's racism. It's racism. I didn't understand that. That's one of the biggest differences that Black families have with African-American families. They talk about race, but we'll get to that a little bit later. The little girl that lived next door to me called me out of my name. Now, language can hurt us. And I bring this up to tell you that I can remember the first time I was called the N-word. Why is that important? Because that's the beginning of me understanding that I was different, that I wasn't like the other children, and that to call me out of my name would hurt me. So let me take this moment to give you a little bit of a lesson. We hear our students use words that we don't like. We hear them say nigger. We hear them say nigga. Both are inappropriate. Both are words that we should not use. But I want to give you a little history here so that you can understand. Nigger is used as a word that people found very offensive today and back in the day. Nigger is someone who is an ignorant person. It comes out of the South, and that is what people were called. It is wrong. I invite you to never use it again, please. Nigga has come out recently. It's in the culture. It's in the music. You have children. You hear them laughing. You hear them singing. You hear the rappers, and they're using the word. It is also inappropriate. It's spelled Niggah. Unfortunately, the culture has said it is okay to use it. Let me say it again. It is wrong. But for those parents that didn't know the difference, now you know the difference. And when you hear students say something like, well, this is what we hear in the music, this is how we talk to each other, you now know the difference. Both are wrong. And what the culture has done is they've shifted from this is negative to something like, well, this is friendly. It's still not friendly. And it is our responsibility to teach our children that. I bring it up to say to you, the first time I heard myself called that, it changed the trajectory of my life. When you talk to people of color, the thing they will tell you is they have remembered the time someone said the word to them. It stings like all heck. It hurts. And yet you learn to hold it in. I'm too old to tell you how old I really am, but this happened in the 60s. It hurt then and it hurts now. But unfortunately, as we've changed cultures and as we've changed the pop culture, people think that it's okay. I want you to think about this. How often do you talk about race in your home? My parents had to talk about that with me when I was 8 years old. So from the time that I was 8, when they bought that home, trying to buy a home in a community that said no to our family, I had to begin to understand you're a little different. Your skin is a little different. Your hair is a little different. And yes, some people even said you speak differently. That's the beginning of the story for most people of color in this country. They understand at a very early age that they are different. They're trying to be like everyone else, but it just doesn't quite work. So I went on from high school and graduated. I did very well. And from there, I ran, for example, to be the president of my student government 4 years in a row. My school was predominantly white. I lost 4 years in a row. President of the student government. The fighter in me, that's the Jersey girl thing. I kept pushing, never understanding that racism was really holding me back. My parents didn't hold me back. They kept telling me, keep going, keep going, keep going. And while I won all 4 years, I went on to college, started out at Northeastern in Boston, and I transferred to the College of New Jersey, ran for student government and won, and met the first president that I met, President Carter. It was a thrilling opportunity for me to do that. But I want you to understand how painful it had to be to go from losing 4 elections, having been called out of my name, to getting to college and finally winning. So then you begin to think maybe things have changed. And they have changed, but they haven't quite changed enough. I went on from the College of New Jersey to work for one of the people in politics in my state, moved on there and went to Kansas City, lived there for 12 years. And that's where my 2 children were born. I got my master's in clinical social work, but I was always involved in social advocacy. When I became a social worker, I worked with students in school around mental health, because we worked at a place where those who lived in the inner city received different kinds of counseling. Part of it had to do with the myths that go around counseling in the African-American community. Worked there for 12 years and then moved on to Seattle, where I worked with people that worked at Starbucks, did some consultant work there, excuse me. And from there decided I wanted more. I really wanted to understand. Now, at some point, I think I got accepted. I accepted myself enough to think Being the lonely only is okay. So I entered the Harvard Business School, and I can remember how lonely I felt at Harvard. I did an executive education program. There were 117 people that graduated, 19 women, and I was the only woman of color. Where do you go? How do you tell that to someone? People on the outside are looking at you and saying, but you're at Harvard. Everything's good. What's there to complain about? But it's very lonely because the people don't understand you quite. You're not invited always in, but you're not out either. So how do you fit? And I want you to understand, when you think about people of color every day, that's what they're dealing with in the world. They're minorities and they're trying to figure out. But many times they're putting themselves in a place where they're keeping quiet, not sharing who they truly are, because they never know when something like racism, a bias, inequities are going to show up. So that's a little bit about my personal story that I think is important for you to understand. I came to the Washington, D.C. area about 18 years ago. My children have attended independent schools. Like you, I wanted the best that I could give to my children. We left one of the independent schools because my son had on the walls, "End, go home." My son is only 28. So to see that, to hear that, you wonder, have things really changed? I think the systemic racism that we deal with is something that we have to continue to fight for every single day. I'm going to move on, if I can, and you understand a little bit about me. I do race work, and I'm going to continue doing some research. I'm particularly interested in women as it relates to rising in corporations, rising in schools, and helping girls understand the gender and race difference that happens to girls. So let me just take a pause and let you just take that in. That's my story. That's only my story. But if you line me up with the students that are at your school who are brown or Black, many of them have similar stories. They're dealing with the same kinds of things that I dealt with. Things have changed, but I'm sad to tell you, things have not changed that much. Where were you on May 25? What were you doing? What were you thinking? Let me give you a couple of hints. Barbecue, holiday, weekend, Memorial Day. Any hints? You know what I'm talking about? On May 25th, Mr. Floyd was murdered. A man held his knee on a man's neck, and we watched life come out of him. The world watched, and they were just shocked. I can't believe this happened. Oh my God, is this really happening in America? We heard all of those things, and people were aghast. White people were. Black people said, we've been dealing with this a long time. Racism in America is real. We've been trying to tell you what's going on. No one's been listening. You see, when you're a person of color, it feels like this. You wake up in the morning and you're in Arizona on the hottest day, let's say Tucson. It's very warm in Tucson. Let's say July 16th. And you get into your car, but you already have a coat on. And you get out of your coat and you have to get into the heat. So you put on a hat and you put on gloves and you cover up with your coat and you step out into the heat. And you say, it's really hot here. Why are you doing this? That's what Black and brown people are saying every day. It's like walking around with a scarf, gloves, a coat, and traveling through the world as though I'm not really sweating. And I hope the next time you see someone, you can think about that, because that's what they carry every single day. And you say, well, what do you mean they're carrying it? Well, you never know when something might happen or things might change or what's going to make it better for me. So you just keep pushing, but it's carrying all of that weight every single day of their life. And people have carried it for years. They've carried it in systems. They've carried it in families. They've carried it in groups. They've carried it in promotions, but they smile to keep pushing forward because, like all Americans, brown and Black people just want an opportunity to do their work and to live on purpose. I was particularly perplexed, and you can pull that article up. David Axelrod, and I pulled this up, it was in the Washington Post. And David Axelrod, as you know, he was a senior advisor to President Obama. And one of the things he talked about in his article is he said, I didn't get it. I didn't know. Now, this is a man who worked with President Obama from the time President Obama was a community worker in the community. And David Axelrod sat side by side with this man from the time he was a community leader, knocking on people's doors until the time he became president. And it wasn't until Mr. Floyd was murdered that Axelrod said, oh my goodness, I get it. I never understood it. Because race is not something that people walk around and say, oh, I think somebody did something to me today to hurt me. They're not talking about it openly. But part of it is there's not been room for people to talk about race. So let me ask you a question. How are you talking about race in your family? How do you invite your children to talk about race? How do you find ways to hear the stories of what's going on in the world, impacting not just your children, but your neighbor's children? What would it mean to you if you shared your race story? Lots of questions. And if you get a chance, please pull up that article, because I think it will give you a different perspective of how much we don't talk about race. But let me say this again, how much white people don't talk about race, because Black people are forced to talk about race every single day of their lives. If not, they could find themselves in a position that could be something that's ugly or death. You've heard the term white privilege over and over. You're hearing people talk about it. People are almost offended by how much it's in our space at this time. There is a researcher out of Wellesley University. Her name is Peggy Mcintosh. Peggy Mcintosh was a professor there. She worked at their she worked at their women's center, and she's done anti-racist work for many, many years. She talked about white privilege this way, and I'm going to say this: let's let go of the guilt. Let's learn together. Let's forgive one another for what you didn't know, because my job is to teach you. My job is to help you. And if you decide you want to learn more, I want you to get it so that you can make the world better. I bring no judgment, just information. White privilege is unearned advantages. If you were born white, you were born white. I was born Black. I didn't create myself. I'm a believer in God. I believe God created me. This brown skin, I just got it. This colored hair, well, that's not God sent, but it'll work for now. But my point is that whatever my skin looks like, this broad nose, God gave it to me. Your blonde hair, unless you're like me and dye your hair, you were born with it. It's the unearned advantages that society gives one, what's called, that brown and Black people do not have. To reorganize it or to recognize it, you have to understand racism, but that doesn't make you a racist. Let me say that again. To recognize it and understand it doesn't make you a racist. You want to understand it for what it is. Yes, I was born white, you say to yourself. Now, what do I do with that? That's the real work. So as you're thinking about how you move about, what do you do with your privilege? How do you handle your privilege? How do you make your privilege help others? Let me give you some examples first about what white privilege is all about. You understand, like I said, white privilege is unearned. It's an unearned advantage. It's a societal privilege that benefits white people over brown and Black people. But again, you did nothing wrong. You were just born. I want to give you some examples of white privilege so that you can begin to understand how the system works and how it's so embedded in what we're doing. I work with families all over the Washington, D.C. and the Maryland and Virginia area. When COVID hit, many families brought their kids home, as you all did too. One of the families lived in Arlington, Virginia. We all know where Arlington is. We know what kind of community Arlington is. This was a family where mother and father decided they had 2 children and they wanted to teach their children more responsibility. So they decided to get a dog. Now, for those of you that own dogs, know that the dog really becomes the responsibility of the parents, but they were trying to do something good and something right by teaching their children. So they brought this dog home and they were training their dog and everybody was happy. And it was a beautiful thing. And then it was time to walk the dog. And the mother said one rule, and the rule was their son could not walk the dog at night because their son was 6'2". And the parents were concerned that if the dog was walked by the young man in the evening, he might be stopped by someone in the neighborhood who would think that he was intruding. That's an example of white privilege. So here we have parents trying to do something good for their children, teaching responsibility, having to learn how to take care of something more than yourself, walking the dog, they got an allowance for that. But the parents had to put in another layer. They were Black and they were concerned about protecting their son who was 6'2", and they couldn't let him walk the dog at night. White privilege. Let me give you some other examples. Generally speaking, when we talk about white privilege, white families have an advantage with the police because you have a relationship with the police. Black people are generally not looking for relationships with the police. I was driving a couple of weeks ago with the owner of the Wise family, and I do my practice work out of that in Alexandria. And we were getting ready to have lunch. And I was really excited. We were going to do our regular weekly talk and whatever we wanted to talk about. En route, she called me and said, I'm going to order your lunch because the place is going to close at whatever time it was. And I said, no problem. We're driving down the street and all of a sudden a policeman pulled up next to me. One pulled up behind me and I panicked and I stopped. And I said, I've got to go. There are police behind me. And she said, oh, okay, I get it. I was nervous. I had done nothing wrong. They didn't stop me. The sight of police will bring that to people of color because of the incidences and the kinds of things that have happened with police. So I immediately thought, let me make sure my hands are at 10 and 2 or 11 and 1. And if you're not familiar with that, that is when you're stopped, we teach our children on the steering wheel, keep your hands so that they're visible at 10 and 2 o'clock or 11 and 1 o'clock. Again, talking about race in the Black family is very different than talking about race in a white family. Our children learn that very early because if they can't see your hands, this could turn into something very ugly. When I did get there with my friend, finally, I said to her, I panicked because I'm a little bit nervous about the police and I didn't know if I had done something and I was hands-free, but just that instinct, it happened and it came over me. And her response was, I'm really sorry it happened. And I said, what would you have done? And she said, oh, I've lived in Alexandria all of my life. I probably would have just laughed. And I said, I'm a brown girl. We never laugh at the police. White privilege. When we're talking about what happens in schools, our school here is very different. What's different? We've got a school here that is committed to eradicating racism by teaching, by having programs, by bringing in people of color on your staff, by bringing in educators of color, by inviting families to read books. But every school is not like this school. And some schools favor teachers, administrators, favor children who are not brown and Black, or don't understand them enough to make a difference or to help them with whatever may be going on. Now, again, children that are coming to your school may not be. They may not be invited to the big gatherings, or they may be invited and the party may be for students who are not part of that school, and they may have a friend from another school who might be a different color, and they could be turned away. That's a real example of what families have dealt with in our community here in the Washington, D.C. area. So we want to be careful. We want to be open. We want to be aware of what's going on with other families and recognize that what's going on in my house may or may not be going on in your house. Another one is when you are a person who is not of color, you have the privilege to attend segregated schools of affluence. Every one of us that attend your school and that have attended an independent school, we are so privileged. We are so privileged. And because I'm a Christian, I will tell you, I thank God every day that I have 2 students that went through independent schools all the way through, got great education and doing good things. But that doesn't make me better. And there's a community out there that have affluence that think that privilege allows them to keep their children segregated to never have to deal with people of color. That's hurtful because diversity makes us all better. So I want you to think about that. You're a parent. Do you have any Black friends if you're white? Black friends. Black parents. Do you have any white friends? Do they come to your home? COVID is an exception. I take exception. But beyond that, and I'm not talking about just having these silly conversations that we have all day long, but I'm talking about getting in a little deeper. What do you eat? What do you mean, what do you eat? Well, macaroni and cheese is on my table at Thanksgiving. Have you had that conversation? Those are the kinds of things that bring us together. Because some people eat mashed potatoes, but I'm telling you, you show up at my house, you don't have mac and cheese, you might as well turn around and go back and get some or come back with something else. But those are the conversations you have when you start talking with people. Those are the things that bring us together. And because we attend these schools of privilege, doesn't mean we can't get into a little deeper into people's lives to understand we're privileged, we're not better, but if we don't learn here, where will we learn? Parents, invite someone into your home and cook a homemade deal. I fried chicken for so many students at prep, I can tell you. And if you need me to fry you some chicken, just let me know. I'll fry you some chicken. And I've got some good recipes. And I say that truthfully. Another way that privilege shows up, learning about race in school. I can't say enough about this school. We're teaching race. I'm here tonight. I'm honored to be able to share my story. I'm honored to be able to talk about language that hurt me. But I bet you, if you ask other people of color, my story is not unique. Learning about race starts in our school, but it's more than learning about Malcolm X, Dr. King, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Barack Obama, Oprah. We know those names. But do you know Fannie Lou Hamer? Do you know that name? That's a wonderful person that we need to know because she's making a difference in how we did this election this last 2 weeks ago. And there are so many others. Do you know W.E.B. Du Bois? He was one of the first African Americans to have graduated from Harvard University. And he talked about this thing called double consciousness. And double consciousness means that I stand one person, but I have 2 consciousnesses. I'm not sure that's a word, but forgive me for that. But he talks about if I am a woman and I am standing as a woman, I'm also standing and being a Black woman. That's a double consciousness. Now, where do I come from? That's what people are coming out of every day, that double consciousness. But unless you're opening up to understand about learning beyond what we see today, you won't know about a W.E.B. Du Bois. Do you know about Eric Michael Dyson? He's the one who's written, has a book coming out coming out shortly. He teaches at Georgetown University. He's talked a lot about race. He's local. He's a minister. And he's also fighting for justice. But these are the names that we're not talking about. These are scholars in our system. And because I'm a scholar, I tend to stay on that side. Dr. Kendi's work is not new. For those of you that didn't know, his work started at American University, where he was a history professor. He did that work there until July 1st of this year. He just moved his work up to Boston University, but he started right here. And for those of you that don't know his story, One of the reasons he decided to write about anti-racism, he had cancer and he thought he was going to die. And what he said was, I might as well tell the truth. I'm going to be dead. Who's going to care anyway? And that's how he told his story. And he has blown up and he's well and he's overcome over his cancer. But that's the reason, and that's how he started. But again, the research has been there a long time. So think about this. Learning about race in our schools, we're very fortunate here. But there are so many others that we're not talking about that I invite you to talk about. Let me give you a few just in case. Dr. Maya Angelou, Dr. Gwendolyn Brooks, Alice Walker, Langston Hughes, Marva Collins, T.D. Jakes, County Cullen, Nikki Giovanni, Thurgood Marshall, George Washington Carver, who, by the way, is the founder of African American History Month, which started as Negro History Week. Mae Jemison, Madam C.J. Walker. She was the first African American billionaire in the country, millionaire in the United States. She did something for hair. Now, when I talk about hair, hair is very, very important to, especially women of color, because we're always trying to figure out this thing about should we straighten it or not. And that has to do with systemic racism. To wear your hair naturally causes people to pause. There's a rule that you don't wear your hair a certain way if you want to work in certain industries, systemic racism. So look at a woman who works on Wall Street. What does she do? She has to look like she's supposed to look, because in order to move up, you must look a certain way. Systemic racism. Another example of white privilege. Finding children's books that represent brown and Black children. Wow. Can you imagine having to look hard to find books about brown and Black children? Have things changed? Yes. But if there's a parent out there that's interested in writing books, I can tell you, you're needed. We need people to write books that relate to brown and Black children, or at least have multicultural faces in there. So all of those parents that have students that are interested in writing, help them write them, because there's an opportunity for them to do something good for the whole and to make money. It's a small business. The problem we have is that the toys, you don't have to look for toys with brown children. For example, if you do any kind of building, or if you're looking to do any kind of cards that are blocks of, or things like that, you don't have to look hard for Black children. I'm sorry, you don't have to look hard for white children, but I have to look very hard for those who are brown. And then I not only have to look for them, but I have to look for stories that represent brown and Black people. Well, what does that mean? Well, what if I want to talk about my hair, which is a big thing for people of color? The haircut, the barbershop is a big place for many men. And the salon is very big for Black women. Where do they go to find books that talk about that? What about the church community? Many brown and Black people are invested in the church community. That's part of the culture. Are there books about that? What about in school? Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a little book about a little girl who was trying to come into your school, and she was brown and everybody around her was white? And the children grabbed her hand and said, "You're invited into our group." What if someone wrote that story? We need more books like that. Real stories, real time. Finding children's books that represent race are minimal, and there's a great need. But again, that's part of this whole white privilege. White families don't have to look hard. They can just find them. The media. Now that's a big place. Let me just take a moment to tell you that the way in which we're socialized are 5 agents. There are 5 agents of socialization. And I don't have much time to go through all of them. But the agents of socialization talk about how you were socialized. So the first place that you're socialized is your family. What do you learn in your family? Well, remember that mac and cheese that I was talking about? I learned that from my family. I learned, again, don't show up at the holiday event without the mac and cheese. Now, what's your favorite? What do you do on Sundays as you celebrate your Christian faith? What do you do at Easter to celebrate that holiday? How do you learn to get, how do you get your faith? How do you learn which clothes you wear? You learn all of these things from your family. Your family is the most positive and most powerful social agent in the world. The second one is school. School is where your child will go. And that's when they learn to stand in line, to raise their hand, to not talk out loud unless you're called upon, or you're in a room and you can't just start yelling out. When you're at home, you want to go to the refrigerator, you just go. When you're in school, there are some rules. The third agent of socialization is work. Work is where we learn to make who we are, and you all know about your work. The fourth agent is media and technology. And that's what led me to where we are here. Media proposes that we be a certain way. You must look a certain way, you must act a certain way, and there are many stereotypes. Media and technology, next to our family, is by far the most prominent and powerful social agent we have in the United States. Given that, how is media showing up in your home? How much media shows up in your home? Now, we're spending more time, I understand, on our technology devices today. But if the influences are all white, what do we do with that? How do we look at ourselves? When I look at television, who do I see? Role model. How do I find that person? The standard, as we know, is blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm not making fun of anyone. I'm just giving you the information based on the research. The stereotypes are there. When media tells people that the only way to be good is to be one with blonde hair and blue eyes, where does that leave brown and Black people? How do they feel? Systemic racism says, don't worry about it. But underneath, people are talking about that. When people say, I don't see color, that hurts. When people say, I don't see color, that hurts. That's about white privilege. That's a way that you don't have to deal with what's really going on. So let me ask it a different way. When you see a brown and Black person, or a brown or Black person, what do you see? And let me tell you how it will show up. If there are 20 people in the room and someone says, oh, Dorri just showed up, and they say, well, I don't know what Dorri looks like, and say, oh, you know, the African-American lady. But that person just said they don't see color. You can't have it both ways. Decide who you want to be. Now, you can say the African-American person. If that's what you saw, absolutely. But admit, you saw color. And the color is about who that person is, culture, what they think, maybe about their education. But to deny it is white privilege, because you see it. And what you're trying to say is, I don't want to deal with that. And what we want to recognize again about white privilege is to come out of that white privilege in a way that we can recognize it without judgment, honor it, and embrace the person for who they are. Those are ways in which I've shared with you how white privilege shows up. I have many more. I'll give you a few more. To stay ignorant and act like you don't see what's going on, it's white privilege. Let it go. We've got to come clear and clean about this whole race thing. America has an ugly history. We understand that. Recognize it. Doesn't mean we're going to beat up on our country. Like all of us, I love my country. But we've got to recognize that this country was built on slavery. Yet the books don't tell us that. So once you begin to understand that, you can then decide, what do I want to do about that? To be insulated is to keep you in a place of white privilege. It keeps you in a place where I don't have to deal with anybody that, unless they look like me. It's very safe. But is it fair? Is it real? And is it right? When you are a person of color, you might be profiled. That's, again, an example of white privilege. What's profiling? That's if two men are in the car and they see a policeman and they pick that person off and they say, well, you turned wrong, or they're watching you. That's being profiled. That's what Black men particularly are dealing with, and some Black girls. I want to share with you a little story here. I'm a very proud mother. I'm proud that he's at your school now. I'm proud of his work. I was very proud to see him at Cornell. Like most parents, you spend all this time, all this money, and all this time to get our kids to where we want them. And my son's sophomore year, by the time he was a sophomore, I noticed he wasn't wearing anything that said Cornell. Now I'm the proud mama. So I've got Cornell t-shirts, I've got Cornell hats, I've got Cornell everything. My son wasn't wearing anything. And I'm thinking, you can't ask a 20-year-old too much because you're not going to get much. But he came home on his sophomore year with 3 other guys, and they came to spend the spring week with me. I was delighted. So we met at another family's home that lived up in Columbia, and they were going to stay there for 4 days and stay with me 4 days. But I wanted to see my son, so I raced up there. The boys get out of the car, and they're all like boys, a little grungy. But it was good. I was happy to see him. And they get out, and I'm telling you, they had on a Cornell hat, they had on t-shirts, they had on sneakers, and Cornell's colors are red and white. They had all this Go Big Red, and I'm the proud mama. Look at you. You all have on all this Cornell stuff. I'm so happy. And my son stepped out. Now, you all have sons just like me, I'm sure. They know a lot, sometimes more than we know. And he said, Mom, chill. You know what that means. And I said, what? And he said, Mom, I'm a Black man coming from Ithaca, New York to Washington, D.C. Sometimes we act up. Sometimes we even speed. We wear this because we're hoping that if a cop stops us, they won't think that we didn't go to Cornell. Wow. At that moment, I thought, is that what profiling does? Is that what happens in America? Now, I've come to accept that, but it caused me to pause for a moment, because here we are, parents, trying to give our kids the best that we can, the best education, the best food, the best clothes. And here we've got a biracial, my son's biracial, a biracial young man having to cover that he might be stopped by a cop with what he wears. And that's why he didn't wear anything. That's just something to think about. When you understand white privilege, you will understand those are some of the things that brown and Black people are dealing with every day. So let's go back. They've got that coat on, they've got that hat on, they've got the gloves on, it's in Tucson and it is hot, and they're trying to protect everything that they've got in the heat, acting like they're not sweating. That's what they live with every day. That's a different kind of feeling. I hope you understand a little bit more about white privilege. I hope you want to look more deeply with me on how we can make a difference and understand what white privilege is. I've sent you a list. I'm not sure that we pulled that slide up, but you have it. You can take it home. I brought some of my own examples, but I sent some in the slides that we used today. I'd like to change gears just a little bit, but I'm going to ask, are there any questions that I can answer at this point? And then I can move on to how to be an anti-racist and how to use your privilege to help other people. Are there any questions that I can answer at this point? Can I stop? Because it's a lot of information.
Feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will go ahead and raise them as we see them. Dorri, I think you can go ahead at this time and we'll collect some questions.
Okay.
Thanks.
All righty. Okay. So, I've talked to you about this thing called white privilege, and you say, well, all right, I'm an action person. I want to do something. I don't want to just talk about this anymore. Let me just give you a couple of things that you can do, and you can start with your own story. What is a race story? I want you to think about creating a race story. I want you to think about who you are. I want you to think about how you introduce race to your family. I want you to ask your children questions about how they see race, and then teach them what you want them to know. Remember that socialization, that agent of socialization, that is what you're giving to your children. You are teaching them how to function in the world with other people. So what does your race story tell you? What did your parents tell you about race? And here's the thing. I want you to not be embarrassed that racism may exist in your family and you don't agree. The beauty in this is you have an opportunity to change things. And that's the beauty of what we're doing in this race work. Like most families, we've said things that we wish we'd never said. We've experienced or seen things that we wish we had never seen, but we've seen them. Own it. So let's say that grandma doesn't like it that there's someone of a different race coming to your home. You're not going to change grandma. Grandma is grandma, but you can explain to your child, we're going to do things a little differently. Grandma did the best that she could. She comes from a different generation. She understood things very differently. And we just love her for who she is. Those cookies that she brings, that's what we love about her. That special dish that she makes, that's what we love. You don't have to get everybody to change. What you can do is you can help others understand for your children and for their children. So that's the first thing. Get involved with yourself to know your race story. And for those that have signed up, and I know some of you have, who've talked about taking the course with me, we're going to pull your story apart to put you back together again. I had to look at my own story. I had to look at what it means to be a Black woman in a predominantly white community. And how do I thrive every day without hate, without being mean, without not wanting to be around people that may have said things to me, or knowing that I've been mistreated, or not wanting to do something to someone that said something or did something. Educate a friend about this class that you took tonight. Tell them, I took this course. This woman told me some things. I want to think about things a little differently. I think I'm going to learn more. Maybe we can learn together. Maybe we can read a book together. Maybe we can walk together and talk a little bit about how we can experience our families and share this information. Admit that you're afraid. Admit that this is going to be hard. Admit that this is going to be comfortable to be uncomfortable. But that's okay. We can do that. We can make this better. So again, educating a friend about your experience. For those that have never had a person of color in your home, and I'm not just talking about Black, of course, let's respect COVID. But think about, can you do a Zoom call? Can you read a book on Zoom with that person? Can you exchange a dish or something? Can you just call and say, you know what? I think I want to do something very different. I remember when I went to my first bat mitzvah. It was an experience. And I had a funny story happen. One of my friends who was an adult, she had never been bat mitzvahed as a child. And she called me about 3 months ago and she said, I want to give you a new experience. And I said, okay, what is it? She said, I want to invite you to a bat mitzvah. And I said, honey, I've been to 13. You'll be 14, but I'll be right there. But again, I opened myself up to something that was Jewish, please attend one. If you're Jewish, go to a church. If you're white, go to a Black church. Listen, we rock it at church on Sunday morning. Go and understand what that's about. The church and the choir is rocking and singing. It's a different experience. No one's asking you to join, but I'm saying you got to get out of your way and figure out something new and different. We've got to stop supporting white supremacy. Do you remember what happened years ago when we were in Virginia? And they were saying ugly things, and our people were just built. And I don't want to get into a political conversation, but it was hurtful. It was very hurtful. We cannot support what we know is wrong. We can't support white supremacy. We've got to think about what happened to the Jewish families that were up in that community in Pittsburgh. We can't support that. When something like that happens, we've got to come together as a community and say, we don't support that. We're going to do something different. Because I grew up in a very strong community of Jewish people, I have many Jewish friends. And when that happened in Pittsburgh, I called my girlfriend who lives here now, and I said, I want to come to your synagogue. I want your family to know that I support what's happening in your synagogue, and this is wrong. And I don't know what to do when I sit in a synagogue. You just hold my hand so I don't make any mistakes. I just want the Jewish community to know that I support what is right. And what's right is standing with people who were hurt and who were killed in that synagogue in Pittsburgh. So we've got to stop supporting white supremacy. And it starts with each of us. And we've got to teach our children to do that. Another thing that you can do is you can be aware of your privilege. What's our privilege? Well, being in independent schools is a privilege. It's an honor. It's very special. Does it make us better? But we want to honor and recognize that. And so when you think about this Thanksgiving and we're going to be at home, think about how we don't have to think about what we're going to eat. We don't have to think about whether or not we're going to have enough food. But there are people, and I saw this in the news today, people were lined up just to get a box of food. Recognize your privilege. And that privilege is, if you're white, you have white privilege. Nobody's following you when you go into Nordstrom to buy something. No one's watching your child if you see a Black child driving in a car. No one's following your child. Those are the kinds of things that Black families are thinking of. When your child leaves home every night, you're not wondering, are they going to come back? I hate to tell you this, but I don't like to see my son go out at night. But how do you tell a 28-year-old he can't go? He's a young man. And so in a sense, I'm enjoying this COVID because it keeps him home. But when COVID is over, he's going to want to be out again. And then I'm like every other Black mother in America, just hoping that he doesn't make a turn without putting his turn sign on, or that everything in his car is right. And that when he is stopped, that he has his hands at 10 and 2. Be aware of your privilege. White families don't have to think about that every single day. And I'm telling you, as a mother, and I'm crying out to mothers now, you know how much we worry about our kids. Add that extra layer and think about how you would feel. Bring in leaders who are of color to learn with you. I'm honored to be here today. You brought me in to share some of my stories, some of the research that I've done, some of the research I plan to do. Continue doing your own work, but get to know leaders in your community. You may have school board members, or you may have people on city council. You have an NAACP. You've got churches that have leaders in the community. You've got political people that you know in the community. You've got counselors in the community. You've got tutors in the community. Get to know them and bring them into your circle. You're offering a class. That's another thing that you can do. But you're offering classes for the parents. Into it in a way. Again, I bring nothing but love to the table. I bring nothing but positive energy. But this is hard work. And in small groups, we can really say, yeah, I want to make some changes. I want to be better. I want to see the world from a different place. Call your school for changes in the textbooks. Now, here's a place that we can really begin to make a difference. When we look at textbooks and we look at the number of people in our textbooks, and we look at the number of people of color, it's minimal. Women and people of color. We only know about a few. Do you think women haven't been part of history? Do you think Black people and brown people haven't been part of history? You can write to the publishers and say, you know what? I'd like books that have more people of color, more women of color that are doing great things to make this country great. And I want the truth. What's the truth? Slavery started here. It was ugly. People died. It was painful. If you go to parts of this country, and if you go in Virginia, there are people that grew up never knowing that Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. That's wrong. We're not here to make fun of him. We're not here to deny him. Let's just tell the truth. And one of the things you can do as a parent is you can say, I want the truth for my children. I don't want to play this game that everything is rosy here. You know, this country was founded as an experiment, and we're still experimenting. So let's take advantage of that. Something else you can do is you can discuss race. Again, small bites, small discussions. Have a conference with your family, with your friends. And if you're really afraid, just keep a journal until you're ready to do it. Write about what you're afraid to do, what you're afraid to talk about. I've prepared a list of books that you can look. You can do this in secret. That's okay. But until you're ready, you've got to do something. But discussing race is a way that you can be an ally. Hold everyone accountable to do the right thing around you. When someone makes a joke or says something rather than cringe and not feel good and walk away from the conversation and hide, walk into it. I'm not quite sure you meant to say that. Say it with a smile. Be honorable. That really hurt me that you said that. Oh, you're just being defensive. I have a right to feel how I feel. I have a right to feel what I feel. That's all you have to say. You don't have to argue. You don't have to make a big deal out of it, but you've got to let people know. We've got to hold people accountable. Check your state boards, hold them accountable. I am in the field of social work, psychology, counseling. Most of the theory is around white men. Where does that leave women and families of color? One of the things that we're looking at is, why are all the boards full of white men? Brown women, Black women, women, white women, Latino women, they're part of this culture. And when we bring them into the community of counseling, we want to hear from them, because the way in which they experience students and families that have pain has to do with pain. But if all these theories are coming from someone who is white, then you're missing something. What are you missing? Well, when you talk to brown families and Black families, the church community is huge. So often you're here, if you watch on television, you've seen a Whitney Houston win or a Halle Berry win, and you heard them say, oh, thank you, Jesus. That's part of the culture. That's their way of expressing. That's the culture that they grew up in. That's how they know their world. But if someone comes into a clinical hour and you don't understand that, you're just there to do the work. Now, you got to understand a little bit about the culture. So what you've got to do is you've got to check and make sure your state boards are diverse. Because if your boards are diverse, that means you're going to get the diversity that you need to help people more. Hold people accountable. And stop sending referrals to people that don't support what you believe. What does that mean? If everyone that you're sending referrals to don't agree with you, why are you sending them? Just because they're a good person is not enough. You want people that have diversity. You want people that have multiculturalism in their world. You want people who think a little bit outside of what you believe, because that's what makes the world better. Don't just support what you support. Understand and think about other people and make that a way that you're going to bring privilege to work for everyone. Those are ways that you can let your privilege help. Those are things that I highly recommend that you think about. Black and brown parents don't always see what you see in your world. They talk race. They know the 10-2 rules. They know what it means to say, get a bag and a receipt. And for those that don't know that, if you are a brown and Black person, your parents may have probably told them, get a bag, put it in a bag, get a receipt, because we don't want anyone to think that you stole it. So Black and brown families understand that. They understand about arguing with cops. Those are the things that you want to think about now when you're thinking outside of yourself. Again, Black and brown parents don't always see the world the way that you see. They're experiencing some of what you know, but they know things that you don't know. And in my world, I say, you know, you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. This issue around race has a lot to do with you don't know what you don't know. Know that your students may be a little bit more bullied, not invited to the parties, not invited to the weekend events, and their parents of color may not want them to go for fear of what might happen to them. Oftentimes, and I've seen this happen, at the end of the school year, students will go to a weekend away. They will go to the shore. I'm sounding like I'm from Jersey. They'll go to the beach and they will spend a weekend at the beach, and they'll have a weekend of all the seniors. And some Black and brown parents are like, a little bit more reticent. Understand their fear. If something happens and they can't protect their child, that's what they're thinking of. It's not that they don't want you to hang out with them, but they're concerned that if something happens and the girls or boys are out, if something happens, that Black or brown child might be blamed if something goes wrong. That's what their fear is, not about being with you. That's what they're thinking because of the culture, the systemic racism, and how they're trying to protect their child. Black parents and brown parents are often afraid. They're often afraid. I shared with you examples. They're afraid of stepping outside at night. When President-elect Biden was elected, I received a note from the NAACP. And the NAACP said to all parents, please ask your children to not be out at night because we don't know how this is going to turn out. And we just want them to be protected. This is Washington, D.C. This is 2 weeks ago. Nothing happened, but there was just a precaution that was sent by the NAACP. And the reason for that is we are in a very tense, a race tense society, and things are not looking good right now around race. We've got to take some responsibility for that. Black parents are afraid. And if you can just stop for a moment and think, wow, think about the cloak, think about the hat they're wearing, think about that Tucson, and think about sweating bullets, but never able to tell anybody anything. And if they were to say something to you, here's the question. What would you say and what will you do? What can they say and what will you do? Well, you see, it's probably very little that you can do except to empathize. But that's where it becomes important that white families begin to listen to what Black people have to say about their experiences, about their stories, about how they're feeling, about what they deal with every single day. It's not easy. And I'm saying to you, I love my country. I want to continue doing what I'm doing. I live my life very well. But at the end of the day, I have that little feeling inside. I have a feeling about my mother who's 90 years old, who can't see anyone right now because of COVID. And I've got the 28-year-old who lives with me. I've got it coming from both ends. I'm no different than many Black and brown people. So understand that parents that you're dealing with every day are a little bit afraid. I recommended the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I wanted to just tell you a little bit about Dr. Kendi. The work that we're doing is about race research. I've not received my assignment yet. I've sent in some things that I'm interested in. But he talks about how to be an anti-racist. And he said an anti-racist is a person who must believe that all racial groups are equal and support policies to reduce inequity. Let me say it again. To be an anti-racist is a person who believes that all racial groups are equal and we support policies to reduce inequity. Very simple in words. But to do that requires a lot. So what must you do? Got to do your worst work. You got to do it. We're all at different places in it. And I'm going to share that in the sheet that I'm going to pull up next. But you got to do your race work. This is a personal journey. This is something that comes from the inside of you that you share with your family. But start with you. Start with what you believe, what you know, what you thought, what you were taught. Address your ignorance. I didn't know that Black families were dealing with this. Okay, now you know. Now you know. I didn't know that it was wrong for me to say, I don't see color. Okay, now you know. If this is the first time you've heard it, congratulations, you're on your way. You see, at the end of the day, people just want to be loved. That's all people want. We want love. And what happens is our own stuff, our own junk, our own hate, our own fears get in the way of that. So if you want to be that anti-racist, think about equality and equity for everyone. Think about a mentoring group. How can you mentor your children? If they play basketball or football, have the boys talk about it. Have the girls talk about it. If they play soccer, it's okay. Be gentle about how you bring it up. Make sure everybody's on the same page. But if you hear something, you hear the kids use words, and we talked about that when I first looked at this. When we first started talking, I used the N-word so you can get the example. Call them on it. Now you know the history of the two words. There you go. Learn your history. It's very important. Many found history boring. I loved it. So I could talk history all day. But there are things that we do need to know. And we need to know the ugliness of how this country was formed and why we have systemic racism, and how systemic racism is where the real problem is. And individually, we process the systemic racism. Understand how women feel. Understand the issues that we're facing in our country. Try to be less judgmental. Try to be less judgmental. I got another story. I told you I love them. When I first started teaching the course, someone said, she was from North Carolina. She never had a Black friend. And she said to me, Dorri, I don't know how to get a Black friend. And she said, and oh, by the way, you talk white. I said, what does that mean? She said, well, you talk white. I'm white. You talk white. I said, no. I speak well. I've been educated. I said, but here's the thing I want you to understand. When you judge a person by the way they speak, you're dehumanizing someone. And I used John Lewis, the congressman out of Georgia. He had a stutter, a deep drawl, but he was by far one of the most profound people in the civil rights movement, who gave up his life practically that we might be having this conversation today. So we want to be less judgmental. And because you're going to hear people use ebonics, and ebonics is a term of people that can speak with a little bit of a Black dialect, who might not speak as clearly or as profoundly as you do, try not to judge them. They may not have had the education that you have. But what you're also going to find is most people of color, Black and brown people, can go in and out with their ebonics or go in and out with their language. So for example, when you're talking to them, if I were talking to my girlfriends, I might say, hey girl, what's up? That's talking to my girlfriend. But I want you to know I can do both sides. So because you hear someone do that, doesn't mean that's their whole way. It means they've learned to play that double consciousness to make it work for them to live their life. There is an advantage to it. And I want you to not judge them when you hear them. For some people, that's all they know, because they did not have the opportunity to get the education that we've received here at a school like this. Hairstyle. You're going to see all kinds of hairstyle. And I bring that up is don't judge the woman on her hairstyle. Listen, I'm talking to you as a Black woman. Black hair is a hard thing, but understand that she's been fighting that all of her life. And it's very difficult to be on television and have your hair naturally up until recently because it was unacceptable. So she's been fighting that. So take some responsibility for the idea that people are only racist because they don't know better. Now you got to take some responsibility because I've told you. And now that I'm telling you, you can't say, I didn't know. You don't have the whole story, I get that, but you have more information. And like my grandfather would say, I put a little more oil in your lamp. And that oil in your lamp is going to keep you flickering all the time. Appeal to your consciousness, to your morals, to your faith. Get involved with policy. That's how you become an anti-racist. But you got to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. There are going to be disparities everywhere you go. There's years of history that we have to unmask and change. It's okay. It's not okay what happened. It's okay that you're doing the work. Show up to do your part. Change you and start with you. Conversations, connections, and you're not alone. Lasting change only occurs in community. Lasting change only occurs in community.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dorri.
You're welcome.
We are so delighted to have you with us tonight and to have you with us in December to continue this conversation. I think as most people on this evening's call are aware, we have a 3-part series for open to 20 people, and it is full for December. And we are looking forward to having those parents go deeper together and with you about this conversation. And we are committed to holding 2 more 3-part sessions in 2021 in the winter, spring of the year. And so we are just really pleased to be able to start this conversation with our parent group at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes, and are happy with everyone that showed up tonight. Thank you for all the time that you've dedicated to this so far, and we appreciate it. Thank you, Dorri.
Thank you.
Very much, very much. All right, be well. Good night.